Chapter 1. Alex. How long have I been here? I questioned, glancing around the small room, trying to sit up and gazing over to the restraints on my arms and legs. I don't remember this. I wouldn't be in a room this small because of who I am. But who am I? I'm dizzy besides all the other stuff I'm feeling. My vision is fuzzy and my head hurts. I feel hungry, and then I see what's being done to me. I'm being fed through my veins, intravenously. I can't remember what happened to me. All I can think about is how cold I felt, because I couldn't get comfortable with all the water surrounding me as I drifted aimlessly. Nothing feels familiar to me now except the dizzy headaches and the hunger. The lights are too bright, and I can't move my hands to cover my eyes. Then I close my eyes and bite down on my chapped lips. I open them when I feel someone standing near and over me, and he speaks. You need to calm down or we'll have to give you another sedative. You were talking out of your head when one of the men spotted you in the water, and we plucked you up wearing a survival suit. My eyes felt heavy, and I searched around for clues as to who was talking, because the man standing over me taking my pulse wasn't familiar. The only thing familiar was his white coat, and I made the connection. I shook my head, because that's all I could get to move. I must have been controlled by the meds, and my speech didn't appear to come naturally. I wanted to talk, but nothing would come. I wanted to ask him questions. Who is he, and why am I being restrained? The other thing familiar was the small office and porthole. He must be a doctor of some kind, I thought. Why was I wearing a survival suit? My mind hadn't connected yet. I searched my memory, and then I remembered a few things. Not much. I remembered feeling the bruise of the ocean water when I jumped from a balcony. But why did I jump? Was someone chasing me? That doesn't make sense, because I wouldn't have time to get into a suit before I went into the water. But why am I strapped to this bed? The answer came from the man taking my pulse. He had adjusted all kinds of tubes into my arms and nose. I recognized oxygen because it's helping me breathe. When my eyes followed the tube he'd adjusted, I knew it was a feeding tube. You're strapped down because we couldn't risk you pulling those things out and falling out of bed. You were delirious and mumbling something when the crew brought you into my cabin. You were calling out for Max and Jonas, and you appeared to be screaming and terrified of Christian, the doctor said, who wore a name tag with Lucas Wilcox on it. I'm the doctor, and if you let me take care of you without any problems, you will be fit to get off at the next port. I can't do that, Lucas narrowed his glance when I interrupted. Why? You're healthy, and the time you were in the water only gave you a beautiful tan. He smiled and chuckled. I'd like to get a tan, but as you see, I can't without burning. Although he thought that was funny, there wasn't anything I could smile about. I knew a Lucas once, but I can't recall his face, nor was he a doctor, and what was I doing here? Dr. Wilcox, where am I? You're on a yacht, and no, I'm not the owner. I work for the owner. You'll meet him if he shows up early to go fishing, or if I deem it necessary for you to stay a few days more, which means you have to be well before you even attempt to go anywhere. Do you have any family members you'd like us to call? No. I mean, where am I? You're off the coast of Mexico. To be precise, you're near the Texas-Mexico border. What am I doing there? I have no idea why you're even alive, except the sheer will not to die. Lucas stopped what he was doing and stood and looked down at me. A beautiful young woman like yourself has no one to contact? Were you trying to kill yourself? Definitely not. I just wished I could remember what happened. I don't think I was trying to kill myself. I asked that question because anyone who was in the Gulf waters, and even wearing a survival suit, would be dead by now. You're very lucky, or you have a great constitution for endurance, under the circumstances you found yourself. Dr. Wilcox, a handsome blonde, tall and with a warm smile, placed his palm on my forehead. His hands were soothing to the touch when he took my pulse, and when he untethered the restraints on my ankles. If I take these restraints off, he said, placing his hands on my wrists and locking eyes with me, will you promise me you won't get out of this bed until I say it's okay? I promise you I won't because I'm too weak, I said, eagerly consenting to his wishes. Can I get some whole food to eat? And can I watch television? The reception for the television isn't that great, but you can use my phone if you don't mind a small screen. Lucas stood back and smiled. I'm going to tell the steward you need whole food, and to bring you something light. Then I'll inform the captain that you should be ready to answer questions. I didn't know what it was that gave me chills. Was it answering questions, or when he mentioned the word captain? Nevertheless, I needed to know what was happening in the real world without asking anyone. When Lucas left, I turned on his iPhone and streamed the news. First, I tuned into the news that was a week old. How long had I been in the water, I thought. It had to be less than a week, or I wouldn't be here to notice that I was hungry and thirsty. When I clicked to a station, there was a picture of a man I recognized. I narrowed my glance and searched my memories, then something clicked and I remembered that face. It was the face of the man I'd married. It was the face of the man I'd feared. It was the face of my tormentor, and then with a jolt, everything came back in a flurry. I had married that monster, and he'd done unspeakable things to me. Then my picture scrolled across the screen, and someone knocked, and then entered the room. It was my doctor, my nurse, Lucas. He entered the room carrying a large tray with 2 covered plates. When he sat it down on a table, he said, "This is the chef's surprise," and I thought I'd keep my patient company. "It's boiled chicken," I said, losing my appetite when the cover came off the plate. "You need to eat something if you expect to get out of this bed before we get to Texas. The captain is going to take me to my home, and then he'll pick up the owner of this vessel. I'm here for one voyage, and it's a good thing, because you needed a doctor, and I was just about to go on vacation." I did as Lucas had suggested, and managed to swallow the boiled chicken and mashed potatoes. Chapter 2. Jonas. "Come on, Mr. Blackstone, what were you doing on that vessel? You're one of the heirs to the Blackstone fortune, and don't tell me again you got tired of all that money, and gave it away, and now you're trying to make a living on a yacht previously owned by your brother. I'm not stupid." That was the problem, he was too smart. He spoke English and Spanish, and I spoke only English, but I could read his body language, and nothing I could say would convince the detective that I was innocent, when in fact I was more guilty of Christian's disappearance than Alex or Max. I sat there as the detective who had seen more dead bodies and ways to kill a man or woman than I could fathom. He didn't waste his time with the good guy and bad guy routine. "I told you over and over why I was on that boat. You didn't want to listen, and I've run out of explanations. If you want to charge me with something, do so, and let me call my brother." He stood up and faced me, then leaned on the table and met me eye to eye. "Your brother is already here, and he's waiting for you. If it wasn't for that Blackstone name and him being a billionaire industrialist, your ass would be rotting in a Mexican jail right now. We know you killed Christian Kenley, but we can't prove it. It seems we have no body, and your brother paid off the crew as far as we know. You probably killed his wife too, you piece of shit. You pendejo." The detective, a large barrel of a man with heavy shoulders, pushed me and said, "Don't you think you're getting away with anything because we have a far reach into the U.S., and when we get the evidence you tossed their bodies into the Gulf, we're having you extradited back here and your ass is ours. There's someone else who's been inquiring about you, and he's in the U.S. If I don't get you, then he will." The overweight policeman escorted me into the other room where Maximilian stood with his hands in his pockets, and wearing a blue suit with a white shirt and no tie, and a grim expression on his face. He had the look of money and disgust, and I had the look of a criminal, and by all accounts, I was. My clothes were soiled, my hair hadn't been combed in the 5 days I'd been incarcerated in a Cancun jail. And the last time I smelled this foul, I had been homeless and sleeping on the streets at night. It wasn't the worst place I'd found myself, but it wasn't a place I wanted to see again. Then as Max turned his face to meet me, the other half of his handsome face was like night and day. I bit my lip before I said something I'd be sorry for. Strolling up to him, I embraced my brother and I said, "What happened, Max?" My voice low and heartfelt with concern. I didn't want to alarm him, because I'm sure he knew how he appeared to me, or anyone else who had known him to be this extremely good-looking, brooding, confident man. His handsome face had been ripped with diagonal scars, and burns extended down and across his chin and cheek. His lips were all that I could recognize as being Max when he pulled down his mask. No one went unscathed in this accident. I guess I was the lucky one. The others didn't fare as well, or maybe they were the lucky ones, Max said, his voice hoarse and unrecognizable. We strode together to the outside and stepped into a car. I knew this wasn't an accident because I knew Max, and I knew when he left in that helicopter with men who had been involved with shaming Alex in the worst way, it wouldn't turn out good. I didn't expect my invincible big brother to be a causality as well. I stopped, looked around and said, "Where's the limo?" "We're traveling in a rental, it's better that way." Max and I climbed into the car, and he pushed a button and pulled into the highway heading to the airport. "I have to see a plastic surgeon in Houston. That's where we're going." "Who's with the children?" "The nanny and caretakers." That seemed to be the case again. The children had spent more time with the caretakers than with their own parents, and that couldn't be good. Alex had been gone a long time, and the children must have suffered because of it, and now it was time to stop this madness. I knew this even if Max hadn't realized it yet. "I need you to look for Alex," Max said, while looking forward, not taking his eyes off the road. "She's gone, Max. How many times can I tell you this? You left us. You know why I left to go back, because I had to clean up the mess you started. That mess was created by you, Max, and don't blame me for this shit this time. You cut us off, and then Alex married that sadistic bastard." Max lowered his head, and I saw tears pool in his eyes. This had to be a first. He lifted his arm and wiped the tears away, and then gazed forward and tightened his jaw. "I take full responsibility for what happened to my beautiful Alex. I don't know how I can explain it to my children, that their mother perhaps had died. I've been telling them lies since she married that animal, and I've run out of stories, and I don't know what to say anymore. I prevented them from listening to the news, but now Maxim is older, and he's with the others all the time. They look up to him, and he doesn't want to listen to me. That's teenagers. Do you remember when we were their ages? Our parents got us out of all kinds of mess," I reminded Max. "If I remember, you were the one who tested their patience to the umpteenth degree. You were hanging out at friends' houses and threatening not to come home. You were falling in love with girls every week, hiding them in your room, sneaking them into the house when you were only 13, tying them up and having threesomes, Jonas. You were a hot mess," Max reminded me. "If I remember correctly, it was you tying them up with your sadistic tendencies," I reminded Max. He stole a glance for a second, then turned his head facing the highway. When we pulled into a hotel, I looked over at him. "Why didn't you go to a Blackstone property?" "Because I don't want anyone to know we're here. With the helicopter accident, and everyone dying except me, and the pilot can't remember what happened, there have been reporters following the pilot around and asking him if I paid to keep him quiet. I can't risk anyone trying to get a look at me either. Someone from the accident scene must have discovered I had burns on my face and scars, but they aren't sure. If they were to see me, they would know for sure. I had to call my doctors to meet me, and someone to pick me up from the hospital. The authorities said the accident appeared to be suspicious, and the reporters jumped on that assumption." I turned to Max. "Did you do it? Did you kill those men?" Max parked the car and sat looking at me until the valet knocked on the door. We stepped out of the rental, and the valet drove the rental away as Max remained silent until we entered the hotel and stepped into the room. The room was a large suite in a lesser hotel than the Blackstones, but it was elegant enough. The Blackstone hotels were some of the most expensive and plush hotels in the US and Europe. Had we gone to anyone, Max would have been recognized quickly, but the way he looked now, it was impossible to recognize him, and now I was the one that all the attention would be on because few if anyone knew there were two of us. Max sat in the first chair and I walked to the bar. "Take your mask off, Max. I want to see you." And I stepped over to the bar and made both of us a drink of vodka on the rocks. Then I walked and sat near him, where he pulled off the mask and I got a better look at his face. I almost cried for my big brother. "What the hell happened?" That wasn't what I wanted to say, but it came out in a penetrating, hard voice. He swallowed his drink and turned to me. "When the helicopter went down, I was thrown from it and landed too close. When it blew, the glass, metal, and fire did its harm. When I woke, the damage was done. Someone called the firemen, and they found me in the middle of the wreckage. They didn't know who I was and brought me to the hospital, where I called James, and he alerted my doctors. You know James. He's the one who posted bond for you on many occasions. Do you remember that teenage girl?" "I don't want to be reminded of that. I think we have more to worry about and discuss than who I'd fucked years ago, when I'd been lied to by a teenager. All I'm saying, Jonas, is you need to be more discriminating when it comes to women. Like I needed Max to remind me of how I'd been put in the position of taking Alex to bed, to keep from letting several men pass her around like a brood mare. I could remind Max of his participation in this, but I saw he'd suffered enough. I'm in anguish too, but this is the first time I'm witnessing Max's hands trembling and having more than one drink." "Why are you drinking?" I questioned, hoping he would lighten up. "He doesn't do well with drinks. You always said it clouds your judgment, and you can't make the right decisions." I know perfectly well what I said before, but this is different. I have to find Alex if she's alive, and until I know if she's alive or dead, I can't function anyway. You seem to be the sober one for a change. Maybe you've finally grown up and thought of more than yourself." Max strolled to the small fridge and opened it and peered inside. "I need to order more bottles of liquor." And he picked up several of the small bottles and emptied it into his now unfilled glass. Max brought the glass to his lips and downed the liquor and reached for a few more bottles. "Maybe if I drink enough of this, I'll be able to sleep. I haven't slept more than 2 hours since your wedding, and that was more than a year ago," Max said, and raised the glass to his lips and then strode back to the sofa and sat next to me. Then he pulled from his pocket a letter. "Do you want to hear what I wrote to Alex after I came to my senses? But it was too late, she'd married that monster." He turned to me with an accusing voice. "You should have stopped her. You always had more sway over her than me. You two were like sister and brother, and I was the one on the outside. Now we're more like lovers who knows we can never love each other again. It will be hell if I find her and she's alive, but it has to be that way, and I'm willing to suffer if she is. You had that wrong, Max. She loved you more than life. You and her children. She knew I was damaged, and she thought of herself as a kindred spirit and understood me. That's all. She thought we were the lost ones, and you were the strongest who knew everything. The truth is sitting here, Jonas. Look at me. I don't know how I'm going to exist without her." What Max didn't realize was there was no way I could go on either if I didn't find Alex. I had to know, and I had something to confess, and until I find her, I could not go on. I didn't have children waiting for me, because my first wife had given up on me years ago, and I hadn't seen my child in that time. The last information I'd received was that my wife had married, and her husband would adopt my child. That left me with Alex and Max's children to pamper and spoil. "Max, I'll find Alex. Trust me." He turned to me, and when I thought he'd questioned the worth of my words, he didn't scold me. He leaned over and placed his head on my shoulder and said, "Jonas, suppose we find Alex. Look at me, how will I ever be the man I once was? Your face doesn't define who you are." But she fell in love with this face. He slapped and rubbed his palm along his damaged skin. She didn't fall in love with a face, I barked. Look at me. She didn't fall in love with me, and I have the same face. She fell in love with the man. You were strong and resilient. You weren't broken like me, and if you were, you hid it well. You knew how to be a leader and not to be led. I fell for every woman I came into contact with, and look where it's gotten me. You built an empire for your wife and your children, and for me. If it hadn't been for you, I would have been on the streets, jail, or dead by now. And if I had controlled our money after our parents died, we would be destitute now. All of what I'd said had been the truth. I'd gambled most of the money in Las Vegas before Max came to my rescue, and before that, he had to pay off one woman after another to get me out of the shit I'd found myself in. When Max said no more and left me and Alex to our own devices, I was the one who came up with the idea to introduce her to Christian. And for that, I regret that ever happened. I drank the last of my vodka. Max was asleep and holding a letter in his hand. I reached and pulled it from his tight fist and started reading it. My dearest Alex. No, that's not right. I need to tell you what you mean to me. You are everything to me. The mother of my children, the woman I adore. I adore every part of you, from your face to your wonderful full breasts I've suckled since you and I have been one. You are everything to me, from the mother I no longer have, to the bitch I've enjoyed in my bed. Who else would have gone along with me when I'd used your body to satisfy my every sexual whim and fantasy? From the time I met you, and you used a whip on me, I knew you were the woman I'd want to spend my life with. However, I was so jealous of anyone who would get close to you. I thought you loved Jonas more than me, and because of that I let you get away. Now I'm pleading with you, Alex, to come back to me. Nothing you've done would ever darken my love for you, and I'll spend my life trying to make up to you what I carelessly did to you and Jonas. I will never accuse you of loving him more than me, because I realized you two have a special bond, and it's not in a sexual way. I guess you can say I've finally grown up, but not grown out of love with you. And can you forgive me for all I've done to break up the beautiful life we have with you and our children? If you can't forgive me, I would understand, and I will work for your forgiveness for the remaining of my life. Just come home to me and our children. All my love. Max. Oh, fuck me. I quickly placed my hand over my mouth, and my heart quickened and my breathing accelerated. Max must never know what happened between me and Alex. It would destroy him, and right now he's vulnerable with his face scarred and disfigured. Get up, Max, and go to bed. I shook Max's shoulder and he was out of it, and from the smell of the liquor on his breath as he stirred and mumbled Alex's name, he was indeed drunk. Reaching for his arm, I draped it over my shoulder and lifted him from the seat and into one of the bedrooms. I dropped him across the bed with his clothes and shoes on. After I had Max settled, I wandered into the next room and placed his letter to Alex into the envelope and dropped it into his leather satchel. My first thought was to discard it, but then I realized this wasn't an option, and Alex had to read it and come back to us if or when I found her. When I sat back after turning on the evening news, because I had nowhere to start, I jolted up and stared at the screen breathless. I paced and then stopped. Chapter 3. Jonas. Captain Donahue had agreed to an interview, and he said he contacted the Coast Guard because he'd seen what looked like someone floating in the Gulf of Mexico near the Mexico and Texas border. The Coast Guard was able to assist in the rescue of what looked like a woman, and because the nearest doctor was the one on his vessel, they took her there to recuperate. One of the men from the Coast Guard who helped in the rescue was interviewed, and this is what he said. The reporter switched to one of the seamen from the yacht. We think it's the wife of the now deceased Christian Kenley, who had been thought to have died in a murder-suicide pact, but with her wearing this survival suit, it seemed like the woman panicked and decided if she didn't die from the jump, then she could survive. It looks like she may have changed her mind at the last moment. The reporter said, "This is very troubling, and we won't know the truth until she's interviewed, but first she has to gain consciousness, the reporter said, and the crew member agreed. I sat there, not knowing what to say or do next. I had to think this through, I thought, and blew out a hard breath. Alex is alive, or she may be alive, and I have to get to her before Max. She can't tell him what happened on that vessel. He's not ready for confessions yet. Even if someone said it's good for the soul. I don't buy into that, because someone said also they always shoot the messenger, and that I would agree with.